Thanks everybody for joining from the Canaries page. I have my Canary shirt on, make your voice heard. For those of you who don't know, Canaries is a technology platform. We're completely dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are so excited to be doing an Instagram Live this morning with Minda Harts. I'm going to jump right in because she is a very busy woman, and so I don't want to take too much of her time up. But I want to jump in and soak up all the knowledge that we can from Minda, where we on the Instagram Live. I have her bio right here because I don't want to miss anything. This woman has a lot going on. So let me tell you a little bit about Minda Harts, a little bit of background about her. So she is the CEO of the Memo LLC. This is a career development platform for women of color. She's also a best-selling author of The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. I don't know how you have time, Minda, but she's also an assistant professor at NYU Wagner. She's been featured in all kinds of media, guys. She is the MSNBC's Morning Joe she's been on. She's been on Fast Company, The Guardian, Time Magazine, and she speaks a lot to big companies. I'm talking about the Microsofts, the Googles, the Bloombergs, and Levi's. She talks about topics related to leadership, managing diverse teams, and self-advocacy. And she also hosts a weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. So stay tuned, guys. At the end, we'll talk about how you can find Minda's book, how you can listen to her podcast. But I'm going to jump right in because, again, this woman's a Renaissance woman. She has a lot going on. So we just want to get those nuggets of wisdom from her.
You're too kind. You're too kind. And I apologize to everybody that I don't know what's wrong with my lighting in here. I have like all the lights on in the world.
Yeah, it's hard. I've been trying to adjust to the remote working in all kinds of ways. A lot of software.
I even have a ring light on right now, and you can't even tell. I don't know.
Oh no, it's all good. I can see you, so that's good.
Okay.
And
All right.
I can hear you, so that's what's important for this session. So, Minda, we've read your book. We've enjoyed the book. It offers so much sage advice, especially for women of color, people that look like us. We loved it, but at the same time, it was a sobering reminder of all the things that are wrong in the corporate workplace that need improvement in the corporate workplace. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your workplace experiences. What led you to write the memo?
Yeah, it's, so I spent 15 years in corporate and nonprofit roles, and my main thing, I was always the only one, right? And I had started to settle into that, like, oh, I guess this is what my career is going to be like, always being the only one. And you start to settle into the microaggressions, settle into the bias, and after a while, I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work. How am I making this better for the next woman, Black woman, woman of color to come behind me? I'm not, right? So what am I going to do to make it better? Then I found it. And that really prompted me to write the memo, because I wanted us to be at the center of the career narrative, not this one stroke fits all, right? One brush for women, but it's different when you're a woman of color in the workplace. And I wanted us to be able to talk about that and be seen, essentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I spent about 12 years in the corporate world at law firms and in-house, and it was the same kind of thing. I always, when I speak publicly about these things, I say, my story is not unique. I've heard it a million times. It's almost that kind of thing where you open the door, you talk to your friend at the office, your one trusted friend, if you have one, if you're lucky enough to have one, right? You close the door and you say, oh, you won't believe what's happening to me at work, and you kind of vent and then you leave. So it's been very difficult, and very few times we see people that look like us in positions of power, right? And when you do, you feel super fortunate, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So seeing people in positions of power that are hopefully allies, right, of us women of color, what advice would you give those allies or people of color in positions of power? We talked about how few that is, but for the few that are, what advice would you give them to support their employees, especially during this pandemic, during COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important that we all have a level of influence. And I think that sometimes we're waiting on somebody else to do it for us. And even if there's only a few of us, what if we share our privilege? We all have some type of privilege to share. And it doesn't mean sharing your privilege doesn't mean you're giving up your seat. It means, how do we add more seats? How do we add more people, add more voices? And so if you are a person of color and you have influence, how are you using it right now, especially in COVID? I mean, there's a statistic that our friends at Lean In put out that said that Black women are really feeling it right now during COVID. They're one of the highest groups to be laid off right now. And so if you have an opportunity to hire one, bring one in, give them a stretch assignment, call them out on in a good way on a virtual meeting and have them speak up, like shine a bright light on women of color in these virtual environments. Because if we weren't seen in the traditional sense, you better believe that things aren't any better for us virtually. So it's really going to require us to leverage, and we can't do it alone. It's going to require some sponsorship. It's going to require some mentorship in those, as you mentioned, the powers that be. And so think about how you want to be inclusive in this virtual environment, because we get to decide right now how we want to return back to work. And it's those decisions and those placements that are really going to be key for us. And so I think be a mentor right now, be a sponsor. This is where the rubber meets the road, because we are in the future of work, and they say that women of color are going to be most represented, but what roles are we going to be represented in? That is what the real question is going to be.
Yes, yes to all of that. So especially on the Canaries blog, you can find that at blog.canaries.com. We talk a lot about the future of the workplace, right? We know that things are going to change. At least we think they're going to change. Who knows, right? And the future of the workplace, we're hoping that it leads to even more inclusion, especially because having to work remotely shines a light on inclusivity and really thinking through and being intentional, right, on how to be inclusive since people aren't together in the workplace. So I'd love to hear from you about what opportunities do you anticipate will stem from this COVID-19 situation? Do you think there will be shifts in the workplace? Will we see things differently? And we know this can be in a number of forms, whether a change in laws or work policies, et cetera. But I'd love to hear from you almost a prediction on, or a hope, hopeful or not, right? On what does the future of the workplace look like post COVID-19?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have platforms and companies like Canaris, because I think we have no choice but to be optimistic, right? That would be a really sad reality if we think that it stops right here for us, right? And so I feel like right now as I mentioned, that leaders have an opportunity to make the workplace better than they left it. We also, as women of color, Black women, have an opportunity to really position ourselves. And right now I would encourage you, so I'll backtrack a little. Prior to starting my company, The Memo, I worked from home at my day job, at my 9 to 5, and all of my coworkers worked in a different location than me, and so I was virtual, and so they lived in California, I lived in New York, and so I had to make myself relevant, right? I had to still put myself out there and network virtually. And so what I want to say is, what I did was I looked at some of the gaps that I could see as a virtual employee, and I started to create a lane for myself to be relevant, to provide resources that no one else could provide. And so I would encourage us to figure out what are those gaps right now, because everybody's at the starting blocks. There's a lot of managers, a lot of leaders that don't know what to do next. And we, as women of color, as Black women, could say, hey, actually, I think this is a new role, right? A new support role, a new chief digital officer role, or something like that. Like, we get to be the creators of our own pathway. And so I'm so excited. So take a look at some of those gaps, study it, and talk to your manager, talk to your allies in the workplace, and start to create your table, because we talk a lot about entrepreneurship, but how can you be an entrepreneur right now and secure your seat? Because there's opportunities to be had, and we get to decide what the future will look like if we practice that self-advocacy strategically.
Yeah, that's interesting. Working virtually, a lot of people don't have experience working virtually, right?
Yeah.
Like, situation has been the first time where they had to work remotely. So almost on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have something that COVID-19 has really shined a light on, and that's some disparities in access, right, among demographics. Like I mentioned, a lot of people have never worked from home before. You have to have reliable internet. You need a computer or a laptop. You need to be able to download the software to be successful in a lot of professional positions. And so one statistic that I'm going to read, because I don't want to get it wrong, Elvest, for instance, they shared that 30% of white Americans are able to work remotely. And you compare that to Hispanic Americans at 16%, meaning they have the resources to do so.
Yeah.
Asian which actually go up to 37%, which is great. And for African Americans, you're looking at 20%. So you can see the disparities among demographics on access. So I really want to hear from you a little bit about how, and you talked a little bit about this, you know, as a virtual worker, are there other ways where we can leverage the ability for women to make sure their voice is heard? Another thing that we do a lot at Canaries is we've been doing a play on remote work, right? I don't know how many times we've been on a meeting, we're talking and it's on mute, right? And
Yeah.
people can't hear you. And so that's happened to so many people. They can relate to that situation. And what we do is we tie that play on remote work, having your mic on mute, to women of color. Even before this remote situation, right? Women of color have been muted in a lot of ways in the corporate workplace. And so we're trying to really figure out, is this an opportunity? Can they leverage certain ways to ensure that their voice is heard? Do you have tips for them to do that?
Yeah, and I'm really big on practical tips, right? Because I could give you these 10-point tips that are not relevant to you, but the first one is showing up on screen. And I know I'm going to get some pushback on this one because, listen, I understand that work from home doesn't mean the same for everyone. And so we also have to understand that. But this is, if we were unmuted, to your point before, we got to unmute ourselves and we got to show ourselves on these screens, right? Even if our hair isn't what we want it to be, our nails isn't what we want it to be, like,
and that is definitely the case for me.
We don't tap out now, right? We let our voices be known, because the reality is, for some of us, we don't have the luxury to turn our cameras off, because when we turn it off, to those people, the majority, they're like, oh, well, what's Minda doing over there? She's not, right? She's not doing her job. She's not invested, right? Like, don't give them any reason not to say that you're not fully invested in the virtual situation. And they need to hear our voices. So maybe you weren't able to speak up because you were a little nervous in the traditional office. You're in your home, you're in your closet, wherever you're at, you know, feel it and unmute yourself when you have something important to add to the conversation. If somebody is microaggressing you, you know, in the virtual environment, make sure that you're handling those situations if you need to, like, you know, outside of the call or in the chat, because this is a place where we get to decide who we want to be now, right? Maybe we didn't show up in the way we wanted to in the best of ways before, but this is, don't shrink now that we're in this virtual environment. It's going to be so important now that we reach out to, the other way that we show up to is asking people for those virtual coffees, right? So if there's a VP or someone you didn't have access to, they're at home just like you right now. And this is where we shoot our shot. So I just want you to realize that there are practical things that you could do. Shoot that email, ask for the meeting, you know, have more regular one-on-ones with your manager. These are the sort of things that we just have to keep up with, because again, many of our managers were not invested in our success when we are in a traditional environment, and we need to hold people to task in this one. But come with your agenda. If they don't have one for you, you set the agenda for the future. It's no more waiting for somebody. You know, like we get to set it. And so what do you want to do? And I would say, you know, this is a really good time too to figure out, is this the table that you want to be at right now? You know, it's so many times we try and make it work at a place that is never going to give us that opportunity. And so right now we get to decide what's best for us. And so I think that's part of securing your seat. What's the right table for you? Only you know the answer to that.
I love that. And so many of us do. We stay, we just grind, we hope things will get better. We go into the office, we put our head down, we work hard, hope that we'll be recognized, which there's so hard to moving up that corporate ladder. There's politics, there's relationships. And to your point, finding mentors, finding sponsors, I think that's one of the most important things you can do. And if you were shy on doing that before because your boss had the door closed, I totally agree. I think now in a remote setting, it's that much easier to, you know, send a direct message or, you know, hit them up, because they do tend to have a little bit more time on their hands at home, and try to have that virtual coffee. I think that's great advice. Okay, so at Canaries, we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. That's our platform's totally dedicated to that. We collect demographic information, policy information, initiatives. We provide diversity and inclusion benchmarking. We invite diverse individuals to give anonymous reviews and surveys. That's what we live, breathe, and eat. And luckily, we're seeing companies really adapt to this new kind of remote environment. I know we're talking a lot about the pandemic, but that's our, I mean, that's our current situation. Um, so luckily, we've seen some companies really step up to the plate. But for those companies that are struggling, and a lot of, let's be real, a lot of companies were struggling before with inclusion and diversity, right? Now we're in this new setting where employees are remote. And so I think companies are struggling with how do we push this diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives when our employees aren't specifically in our office. So can you talk to me a little bit about how can companies in this remote setting be inclusive, and specifically, how can they really support their diverse employees in such a setting?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think for starters, I think managers, leaders, start to communicate with your staff, because again, we've said, okay, everyone go work from home, but you don't know what that means for me, right? You don't even know if I have a computer at home, right? Like
Yep. Yep.
it's like, it's down to those things, like you said, the internet. So I think we can't, I'm rereading the 4 agreements right now, and one of those agreements is, you know, don't make assumptions. As leaders, we can't make assumptions that everybody has internet. We can't make assumptions that there's not 15 people living in their house right now, right? So quiet may mean different, right? Or having a space to work. So I think we first have to realize that making sure that we have communications with our staff to ask what they need, right? The simple question, how can I help you be successful during this virtual reality, which I think is a lot of times we're not asking the question of what people need. We just assume what they need. And I think that's a very much a missed opportunity. And then when we are asked what we need as women of color, we got to be honest, right?
Uh-huh. That's
say,
good. I'm good.
that I'm good, right? If you know
Uh-huh.
that you're not, like, this is the opportunity that we have to take advantage of. And so that, again, practical things, meeting people where they are, because you can't be successful if you can't even get on the internet, right? If you don't have the right computer to do your work on, or you keep asking me to scan things and I don't even have a scanner. You know what I mean? Like, let's get down to it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have to figure out, what do people need, and get them the resources they need to be successful. But the other part of that too is having a game plan in terms of, okay, I think part of this is communication. So like a lot of leaders, how do you manage diverse talent? You don't even know the people on your team, right? So making sure that you're spending time getting to know people and asking what they do. And this really comes down to relationships. So much of our success inside of a company, or lack thereof, is having the right relationships. And so I may sound like a broken record right now, but it's making sure people know we exist right now, that we are here. Let them know what we're working on. We don't get the opportunity to be in the elevator with people anymore in a traditional sense, right? So you have to create those opportunities, those elevator opportunities where you're telling what you're working on. Because here's the thing, right now, a lot of managers are trying to figure out, do they need you right now, right? Is your work relevant? Can they cut you? And I hate to say that, but this is where you shine. This is where you get to advocate for yourself and let people know what you're working on. Like, again, don't let COVID stop the show. It may not have been on your vision board. It was on none of our vision boards, right? But your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, they were still there. So don't stop today. Let people know what you need. And then also, again, is there a certain skill set that you need during COVID to make sure that you're leveraging the next opportunity inside your company? And so I think it's really important, again, the main thing is not to shine, but to get inside our managers' faces, or those powers that be, and let them know what we need. Because I think, so back to your point of unmuting, we've been working hard hoping that someone comes and tells us what the next step is for us, right? Oh, you get the promotion today, right? And we know that 9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen that way. So we really have to be our best advocate, and how we secure these seats going forward is going to require how we advocate for ourselves by quantifying our value and articulating our worth, because they're going to try to get rid of us if they don't know what we're doing, right? Are we essential employees? Hell yeah.
Yes. Yes. I totally agree with that. Yes. I totally agree. We have to let them know what we're doing. And it really goes two ways, right? Like, we have employees that are introverts and extroverts. Introverts seem to be thriving a bit more. And hopefully this is a platform where they can feel comfortable saying things and being seen, to your point. And, extroverts are missing that time on the elevator. They're cringing. They don't get to talk to people
Yeah.
person. They don't get that human connection. But I agree, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, if you're a person of color, if you're a diverse individual, you have got to be seen, because to Minda's point, it's so true. Companies are trying to figure out, what are they doing with their employees? Who's essential? Who's not essential? And they
Mm-hmm.
will likely, especially given what everyone's predicting to be a recession, will make cuts. And so you don't want to be that. And we've already talked about the disproportionate laying off of specific folks and specific demographics, women of color and other people of color at these jobs. I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with that. And to your point about employers being more patient, I totally agree. I mean, I don't know how many times, thank goodness at Canaries, nobody cares. They just kind of had my daughter and son come in. I'm actually very surprised they haven't come through that door right there and said, "Mommy, mommy." And so I've been lucky, but before I would have been mortified, right? Before this remote world. Now I'm like, "Oh, that's my daughter. Say hi. Okay, go back out. Okay,
Yeah.
yes, back to the video." So I agree with all that. Recently on our social media channels, we put in a meme, and I think this sums up my next question for you so well. It's a meme with Reese Witherspoon, Legally Blonde. Some of you guys might be too young to remember that, but it was kind of a silly movie. And what it is she's being interviewed for a job, and the interviewer says to her on the meme, "Do you have any questions for me?" Right? That infamous last question, where you're expected to have questions. And Elle from Legally Blonde says specifically, "Yes, how did your company handle the pandemic, and how did you support your employees?" And I think it sums up so well, because how companies treat their employees today during this pandemic will be remembered for a very, very long time. And it's going to have a profound effect, I think, on employee engagement and, very importantly, loyalty, right? If they bad memory, they end up staying, they don't get cut, right? And
Right.
not feel supported, what are they going to do as soon as those opportunities come back up? They're going to leave. They're going to go to a new job. So I want to talk to you quickly, and this is our last question of the day, and thank you so much for giving us your nuggets of wisdom already. But what do you see as defining characteristics of a company that will be, after all this pandemic stuff is over, and we know it will be over at some point,
Yeah.
as successful, a company that has gone through this whole pandemic and that was successful with respect to supporting their employees? And if you have any examples of companies you've seen do this along the way, I mean, feel free to throw those in. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about those companies that are doing well, that are supporting their employees and are stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And you're right. We're going to remember this. And I think as we all start to, look for new opportunities, really looking and seeing what that company did during COVID-19, right? And so what I will say is that I think those characteristics are leading with empathy. I think right now, like you said earlier, many people are working from home for the very first time, so you can't expect everyone to get up to speed, or it takes a little time to get used to that. Or if you've never used a Trello board, or you've never used Slack, right? Understanding that this is a new part of reality. So I think leading with empathy is very important. I think listening with curiosity when your staff comes to you and talks to you about something, being curious, asking questions so that you can be the best resource for them. And then lastly, leaning into our courage to be better allies and resources, because if we weren't doing a good job of that in the traditional environment, quote unquote, then it's really important that we step up. So allyship and talent development doesn't stop because we're in a new virtual environment. Actually, true talent development starts today. And so invest in your staff. Don't say that career development is not necessary. We don't have a budget. No. How are you treating your employees at a time when they need it most? And so those are the characteristics I would look for if I was looking to stay on a team or move on. Those are all things. Let's not just, I think Brene Brown says it best, don't just look for the mission on the walls and the halls, but what does it look like in action?
I like that. I like that a lot. I think I agree with all of that. I think leaders, everybody on this live, everybody not on this live, whether you're a woman of color, whether you are an ally, you have got to be intentional in this. It's so easy to lose the big picture on diversity, equity, inclusion, making sure all your employees feel like they are part of the team, that they are valued. But it's more important now than ever, to all of Minda's points, that these employees, all employees, whether diverse or not, feel like they belong. They feel like speak up. They feel like their voice is not muted. Minda, thank you so much for your time today. I want to make sure that you tell us, where can we find the memo? And guys, if you're a woman of color, it's a must read. If you're not a woman of color, it is a must read. I think you need to read it. If you're not a woman of color, get a sense, get some perspectives on what it's like to be a woman of color in the workplace. So I want to recommend that book to everybody. Minda, tell us where we can find the book, where we can listen to your podcast. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to shut.
I appreciate that. Again, thank you for sharing the stage. Thank you to you and your team for having me on today. If you don't have the memo, thank you. Hey, thank you for joining in. You could be anywhere on the internet right now and you're here with us. So I don't take that lightly. Go to the best, quickest place is probably like Amazon or Target or Barnes and Noble, but the book is available. It's on audio and it's in a physical or Kindle format, whatever your preference, but make sure that you go and get it because our stories need to be heard and told. If you're a manager, read the book, because how are you investing or engaging with your diverse talent? You need to understand what it's like for someone to walk in and be one of the only ones. You can find me on all platforms at Minda Harts, MindaHarts. And if you go to my website, mindaharts.com, you will, and sign up for the virtual book club. I do a virtual book club on my Instagram page every Thursday at 4. But also, the last thing that I'll say right now, if you're looking for a leadership opportunity, here's one for you. Here's the hack. Create a book club for your team, for your department. You guys can suggest the memo if you go to mindaharts.com and sign up for the virtual book club. I created a discussion guide, so it helps facilitate those conversations, and you'll get it. So get in where you fit in. But again, thank you so much, and keep securing your seat.
I love that. I love that. Creating your own opportunities is what Minda said. There's one for you right there. Create a book club. I mean, your employees are going to love that. It really goes to engagement in a remote time when engagement is so hard. So I love that. Thank you so much. Guys, thanks for joining in. To Minda's point, we know you can be anywhere, anywhere. So thank you for being on Instagram and joining us. You guys check out www.canaries.com. We are an awesome platform. We're all about diversity, equity, inclusion. So if you haven't heard of us, go to www.canaries.com. Check us out. That was my minute of self-promotion. And so thank you guys. We're going to check out. Minda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Us. And I'm sorry for the lighting. You know, I bought this fancy ring lighting. You can't even tell.
Oh, man.
Take care.
That's what's most important right here in your advice. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And we're cheerleading for you. We're going to keep following you.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Canaries is out. Catch you guys on our next live. Bye.